They said it was an apology, but what if it was really a strategy? What if the tears, the remorse, and the sudden repentance were not about healing at all, but about control, image, and rewriting history? Because when someone who avoided accountability for years suddenly wants forgiveness on camera, you have to ask, why now? What changed? And who benefits from this moment? Stay with me, because once you see the pattern, you will never hear these apologies the same way again. She said she would cry the entire flight home, hours of tears without pause, and then more tears when she reached the airport. She said she would lock herself in the bathroom and not talk about it right now. And that moment alone sets the emotional temperature for everything that follows. Because this story is not about a single conversation. It is about years of quiet endurance, years of emotional labor, years of being the stable one, while everything else slowly cracked beneath the surface. And when someone says they are going to cry for 4 straight hours, that is not drama, that is release. And what makes it heavier is that the person she is leaving behind has been her support system for a very long time, which tells us this separation is not symbolic, it is deeply personal. And that is where the tone of this entire situation begins, because while emotions are raw and real on one side, there is a sudden and very public shift happening on the other side. And that shift comes in the form of Cody Brown appearing remorseful, apologetic, reflective, and suddenly aware of pain he helped create. And for viewers who have watched this family for years, that shift feels abrupt, almost jarring, because this is a man who has historically doubled down, deflected, blamed, reframed, and resisted accountability. So when he arrives with apologies, it raises immediate questions. And Janelle Brown was not immune to that surprise. In fact, she openly admitted that she was caught off guard by how intense the apology felt, how heavy it felt, how structured it felt, and how emotionally overwhelming it was to receive. And instead of feeling relief, she felt confusion. And that is telling, because authentic apologies usually bring clarity, not confusion. And it was that confusion that led her to ask a very specific question, one that cracked open a much larger conversation. She asked him directly whether he had been involved in a 12-step program, and that question did not come out of nowhere, because in those programs, there is a step dedicated to making amends, to acknowledging harm, and to taking responsibility for past behavior. And the way Cody presented himself felt like someone following a framework rather than someone speaking from spontaneous remorse. And that distinction matters, because when accountability feels rehearsed, it triggers skepticism, not comfort. And Janelle herself has lived close to the realities of addiction through her son, which gives her insight into what structured repentance looks like and what it does not look like. And she was clear that the apology felt thick, heavy, and excessive, to the point where she needed time alone just to decompress from it. And that reaction alone should tell viewers that something about this did not sit right. And while Cody frames this apology tour as personal growth, there is another presence shaping the narrative. And that presence is Robin Brown, whose influence becomes increasingly visible as these conversations unfold. Because Robin does not frame these apologies as Cody making things right for the people he hurt. She frames them as Cody making things right with God. And that reframing is subtle but powerful, because it removes the focus from the harm done to others and redirects it towards spiritual alignment. And that shift conveniently protects Cody from criticism, because if his motivation is divine, then questioning it becomes uncomfortable. And Robin repeatedly emphasizes that this is a mission, a journey, a calling, rather than a response to public backlash or internal family conflict. And that is where many viewers begin to feel manipulated, because Cody has already admitted that one of his motivations for apologizing was wanting people to stop talking badly about him. And once that motive is stated, it cannot simply be erased. So instead, the narrative evolves, and suddenly the story is no longer about damage control, it is about faith and redemption. And that evolution feels strategic because faith-based framing discourages scrutiny and creates a built-in excuse if forgiveness is not immediately granted, because then the problem is not the apology, it is the receiver. And this becomes especially important when considering Christine Brown, because from the very beginning, Robin expresses concern about how Christine will react, reinforcing the idea that this meeting will not go well, and subtly planting the seed that if Christine responds with distance or skepticism, it is because she is not spiritually aligned enough to understand the seriousness of Cody's journey. And that sets up a psychological advantage because it positions Cody as evolved and Christine as resistant before she even speaks. And that is not accidental. That is narrative control. And as the episode progresses, this pattern becomes clearer because Robin repeatedly frames accountability as shared responsibility, insisting that everyone has a role to play in the breakdown, which minimizes Cody's individual actions and gives him an emotional safety net if his apology does not land. And for viewers who remember the history, this feels deeply frustrating because Christine and Janelle have both documented patterns of manipulation, control, and punishment when they spoke negatively about Cody in the past, including withdrawal of time, resources, and emotional connection. And Christine herself has written about Cody's obsession with his public image and how far he would go to protect it. And that context matters because it explains why these apologies feel hollow, because they are not happening in a vacuum. They are happening after years of behavior that contradicts the words now being spoken. And when apologies arrive only after consequences, they feel less like growth and more like strategy. And this becomes even more apparent as the focus shifts to the meeting between Cody, Christine, and David, because Cody approaches that interaction with visible tension, hyper-focus, and insecurity, repeatedly speculating about Christine's response and labeling her as non-confrontational, dismissive, and emotionally detached. And that framing serves a purpose because it lowers expectations and allows him to interpret any response that does not validate him as evidence of her inability to engage seriously. And Robin reinforces this anxiety by warning him that the meeting will likely be negative, while simultaneously insisting that the responsibility is mutual, which again protects Cody from feeling fully rejected. And before the meeting even begins, Cody claims that he invited David, which is a critical distortion, because Christine invited David for her own sense of safety and emotional support. And that choice speaks volumes, because it reflects her lived experience with Cody as someone whose presence alone could escalate situations. And David is not there to interfere, he is there to ensure boundaries are respected. And that dynamic threatens Cody because it removes his ability to dominate the emotional space. And so he reframes it, claiming authority and control by asserting that David is there because of him. And that reframing is not about etiquette, it is about power. And when the meeting finally happens, the discomfort is undeniable because the apology itself lacks specificity. It is filled with general statements about anger and struggle and healing, but avoids naming concrete actions. And Christine responds calmly, stating that it is in the past, and that moment lands with more weight than any argument because it denies Cody the emotional release he was seeking and reveals the core truth that this apology was not about her healing, it was about his relief. And when that relief is not granted, the tension remains unresolved. And that is why this entire situation feels unfinished, because it is not closure, it is performance. And as long as accountability is staged rather than lived, the cycle will continue. And viewers can feel that something is still missing, which keeps them watching, not because the story feels complete, but because the truth feels just out of reach. As the situation continues to unfold, the deeper issue becomes impossible to ignore, which is that none of these apologies exist in isolation. They are layered on top of years of unresolved patterns, and that history quietly shapes every reaction, every pause, and every guarded response from the women involved. Because trust, once fractured, does not return simply because someone decides to speak softly and use reflective language. And what makes this particularly unsettling for viewers is how often accountability is framed as emotional effort rather than behavioral change. Because Cody frequently emphasizes how hard this process is for him, how uncomfortable it feels, how much courage it takes to show up and apologize. And while emotional effort can be meaningful, it does not erase impact, and it does not undo years of dismissal, absence, and imbalance. And that is where the disconnect lies, because the women are being asked to validate the attempt without seeing evidence of transformation. And that gap creates tension that no amount of emotional language can bridge. And Janelle herself articulates this when she explains that the apology was so overwhelming, it required distance rather than closeness, because it did not feel like an opening. It felt like a flood. And floods do not invite conversation, they force retreat. And that reaction is deeply human, because when someone delivers an apology that centers their own emotional process, it can leave the recipient feeling responsible for managing their feelings rather than being allowed to simply exist in their own truth. And Robin's involvement intensifies this dynamic because she consistently positions herself as a translator, mediator, and moral compass, inserting herself into conversations where she was not invited, and reframing conflict in ways that soften Cody's responsibility, while urging the other women to endure discomfort for the sake of harmony. And that pattern has been visible for years, from moments where she encouraged Janelle to stay seated while being spoken to harshly, to moments where she justified raised voices as emotional expression and discouraged boundaries. And what is troubling is not just that these interventions happen, but that they are presented as compassion, when in reality, they often invalidate the experiences of the women on the receiving end. And this becomes especially clear when Janelle sets a firm boundary and explicitly states that she does not want Robin present for future conversations. And that boundary is not about exclusion, it is about safety, emotional clarity, and the ability to speak freely without having words filtered or redirected. And the fact that this boundary was necessary speaks volumes about how intrusive Robin's presence has been. And rather than reflecting on why that boundary exists, Robin frames it as hurtful, which again shifts focus away from the behavior that prompted it and onto her emotional response. And this pattern repeats itself with Christine, where Robin anticipates conflict, not with concern for Christine, but with anxiety about how Cody's apology will be received. Because the priority is no longer repair, it is reception. And that distinction matters, because true accountability does not require positive feedback. It accepts whatever response comes. And yet, throughout this process, Cody appears preoccupied with outcomes, whether he will be forgiven, whether he will be understood, whether he will be perceived as sincere. And that preoccupation undermines the apology itself, because it reveals an expectation attached to it. And when apologies come with expectations, they cease to be gifts and instead become transactions. And Christine senses this immediately, which is why her response remains calm, measured, and emotionally distant, because she is not there to soothe him, she is there to protect herself. And the presence of David reinforces that protection, not as an aggressor, but as a stabilizing force, a reminder that she is no longer alone in navigating emotionally charged interactions. And Cody struggles visibly with this shift because he is accustomed to controlling the emotional environment, and David's presence removes that control and exposes the imbalance that once existed. And so, Cody reasserts authority verbally by claiming he initiated the meeting and invited David, which reframes the dynamic in his favor, but does not change the reality that Christine set the terms. And that reality is what truly unsettles him, because it represents a loss of power. And as the conversation progresses, the apology remains vague, and Christine does not engage emotionally, which frustrates Cody because emotional engagement would validate the effort. And when she instead places the relationship firmly in the past, it denies him the resolution he sought. And that moment is pivotal because it reveals that healing does not always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like distance and acceptance. And that truth clashes with the narrative Cody and Robin are attempting to build, which is that healing must be mutual, visible, and affirming. And when Christine does not perform that version of healing, it exposes the limits of the apology itself. And viewers feel that tension because it mirrors a common experience where people seek forgiveness, not to repair, but to relieve their own discomfort. And when that relief is withheld, the frustration surfaces, and that is what lingers at the end of this episode, because nothing has actually been resolved. The words were spoken, but the patterns remain, the dynamics remain, and the power struggles remain. And until those change, no apology, no matter how emotional or public, will feel complete. And that unresolved feeling is what keeps audiences engaged, because the story has not reached truth yet, it has only circled it. And as long as the focus remains on image rather than impact, the cycle will continue repeating itself in new forms with familiar discomfort and quiet resistance from those who have learned that peace does not always come from engagement. Sometimes it comes from stepping back and choosing not to carry what is no longer yours to hold. At the end of the day, apologies only matter when they are followed by change. And when words are used to seek relief instead of repair, the truth always shows itself in the silence that follows. This story is not about closure. It is about clarity. And once that clarity arrives, there's no going back. Because healing does not come from being convinced, it comes from being done.